The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everybody, welcome to the webinar. Thanks for joining me tonight. We are going to jump right into it. There's a lot to cover, and I want to make sure that we cover any questions that you guys have too. So, let's see. All right, cool. I think we're all set. So if you guys have not been on a webinar with me before, I'm assuming most of you have, but if you haven't, usually what I do is the presentation and then I do Q&A afterwards. So if you think of questions while I'm going through the presentation, feel free to type them in the question box just so you don't forget them. The question box should be in your little webinar control panel thing, and then I'll answer them at the end. So yeah, let's jump in and get started here. So who am I and what are you doing here? So for those of you that don't know me, my name is David Ford. I'm an affiliate, marketer. I've done a lot of different things. I also like cats. So yeah, I've been doing this a lot of years. I started Ath Playbook in 2009. So that's coming up on, the anniversary, I guess. And yeah, I've been doing a lot of coaching and teaching. I still do a lot of affiliate marketing and other related entrepreneurial type of projects. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about content curation, and I'm going to talk about what content curation is, some examples of it, why it is an effective marketing strategy and why I think it's really good, and then kind of how to get started, or at least one way to get started with it, and also how to make $12,721.87 in the next 24 hours, but not really. Content curation, it's a huge topic, and we're just barely scratching the surface here. Even if we had a lot more time tonight, we'd still just be barely scratching it. There's just a lot of ways. It's not that it's super complex or anything. There's just so many ways you can go about it. There's not just one right way, and that's kind of one of the cool things about it. So what is content curation? I gotta get my examples ready here. So to curate something, it basically, in a sense, means to kind of collect or organize something. So, if you've ever been to a museum and they say, oh, we have, the Picasso exhibit on display. Well, they curated pieces of, that artist's work that they want to show you. Same thing, sometimes they do that like with wines or, lots of stuff, but that's essentially what it means. So when we're talking about curating content, it isn't writing your own original content, it's finding and sharing other people's content. This isn't stealing the content, it's not black hat marketing or even gray hat marketing or anything like that. So I've talked to some affiliates about this and they go, well, you mean I'm just like ripping the content and stuff? And that's definitely not what it is. So you're not taking it and claiming it's your own or using it without linking back to the original article. Like if you're doing, say, a roundup post, which I'll talk about in a minute, you'd just be doing a summary and using a snippet from each piece you sourced. So it doesn't have anything to do with stealing content. And this is a very mainstream strategy. Virtually all companies to some degree do some kind of content curation these days, it seems like, and some rely on content curation for the majority of what they do in certain channels online or as just like their overall strategy. I was going to say this before, but another even easier explanation of content curation is, when you stumble upon something funny or weird that you go and share the link on Facebook, kind of the same thing. You're just sharing content because you think people would find it funny or useful or, get some kind of value out of it. So most likely you see content curation every day, even if you are not familiar with the term. So let's take a look at this. You guys probably know the site BuzzFeed. If you don't, you can go browse around, but this is a really good example of a site that does a ton of curated content. This post here is one of those examples. So what's going on here? Essentially what it is, if we kind of dissect this, there's a headline, there's a link to, like in this example, they're sharing some social media posts. So this article, 14 cat posts from the week, blah, blah, blah. And they're just going out and finding funny pictures that they found on, it looks like Twitter and Instagram and some others. They're kind of adding a title to it to give some context, and that's pretty much it. Notice how, they're not just taking the pictures or the videos themselves and saying, here they are. They're saying, here they are, and here's who posted it. Okay. This is just like a really basic example of, curated content. So the idea really isn't just going out and grabbing the first 14 cat pictures you can find in this example. Whoever wrote this hopefully spent some time figuring out, okay, what posts or pictures are going to, get the most reaction. And BuzzFeed does a lot of analytics, so they, know what their audience reacts to, which is an advantage that they have. But in a basic sense, they're just saying, what are the funniest pictures or the cutest pictures? So yeah, that's it. And notice too that I'm going to talk about this later, that they share their own titles. So they're not, obviously you can see the original post here because the way they're shared, it's like an embedded post, but they have their own headlines, and that's going to be really important later. So hang on to that thought for a minute, because I'm going to come back to that. Okay. So content curation really is just when you find great content from other sources and share it with your audience. Great content obviously is subjective, and it can mean a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily have to mean the best content or, the funniest or something. It just has to be something that, you can share that your audience is going to like. And I'm going to give you some examples for sure later on. Actually, right now and later on. So let's look at a couple examples. If we pull up this link. Okay, so nextdraft.com. It's an email newsletter, essentially. And what this guy does is he takes news stories. I believe it's a certain number per day. I don't remember. I think it used to be 5 per day. I don't know if he's doing more now, but it's a certain number of, newsworthy posts, like mainstream news stuff you'd find if you go to, your local news or CNN or whatever. And he goes out and he finds these, but what he adds to it is he kind of has a funny way of presenting them, or a funny way of like looking at them. So it's not just like, here are 5 stories from the news today. It's like, okay, look at this. It's totally ridiculous. Or, it doesn't have to be funny. It could be, this is really serious. Look at this. But the reason that people subscribe to this newsletter is not because, they get the news, because they can do that from anywhere, obviously. It's, part of it is what he adds to it, or what kind of he brings to the table. So that's a big part of content curation, is basically what can you add that's going to make people, want to source their content or consume their content from you versus other places. The next one is the skim, and I like this example because it's just a little bit ridiculous that it is worth so much money and makes so much money. So again, newsletter focuses on daily news. It's specifically aimed at like younger working women though, who don't really want to consume like heavy news or really get into it. Um, the skim in their newsletters, they have kind of a funny slash snarky tone to them. And so, they kind of have their own spin on these headlines, and people that subscribe to them just kind of want, real basic, headline like, okay, this is what's going on, and that's it. So this is one example that they've, taken really big. Last I read, it was valued at over $50 million. They got all this funding and stuff, and they've just grown like crazy. And it's a very basic business when you think of it. I mean, what I told you is pretty much exactly what it is. There's not much more to it than that. I'm sure they have different writers now and stuff, but it's not something that is beyond the realm of possibilities for really anyone to accomplish. Another example would be a site that lists, say, documentary. This one that lists like documentaries, in different categories. So they're not creating documentaries, or they're not writing original posts reviewing documentaries. They're just collecting them into different categories and saying, here's 5, documentaries about politics that you can watch, or here's 5, true crime documentaries you can watch, that kind of thing. So it can really be, and this is just a few examples of many that you can do. So, like I said, there's really almost countless ways that this can be done. I mean, it doesn't just have to be one thing like a newsletter. It can be a combination of things like a site and a newsletter, or it can be, just a social media account, even in some cases. I don't know if you guys know of UberFacts on Twitter. So this guy, Chris Sanchez, he was bored one day, and so he started browsing kind of useless. I use that term loosely. It's just more like kind of trivia facts, like stuff you wouldn't know, but it's not something you really need to know, just kind of interesting facts that were like, oh, wow, I never knew that. So he just started browsing these and looking them up one day when he was bored. And he decided, okay, I'm going to turn this into a Twitter account and just tweet these things. And so, for a long time, he posted 3 times a day, just these facts that he, went out and found. And the last time I checked on this, he was making $500,000 a year. It's probably closer to $1 million now with, different ways that he's making money. But so that's, he does have a site now, but before, I mean, it wasn't even a site or anything. It was a Twitter account, so that's another example of something that's super simple in concept, right? But, it's interesting enough to attract a huge audience. You guys have probably seen stuff like this on YouTube, right? So like, there's a ton of these top 5 style videos, 5 scariest things found in the sewers, or 5 strange disappearances in Vermont. You know what I mean? Anyone that's been on YouTube has to have seen stuff like this, right? The number doesn't matter. It could be whatever. This is essentially curated content too. They're not making original videos or whatever. They're taking, ideas or stories that already exist, and they're just talking about them. They're taking pictures that already exist or clips of videos that already exist and just kind of stringing them together and putting a commentary on it. And this, I mean, look at how many subscribers that is. That's a lot of money, not just through monetizing through YouTube, but other sponsorships and everything. I mean, if we sort this by most popular, I mean, you're seeing like 40 million views. I mean, this stuff gets tons of traffic. This a site like this, and there's a lot that do that. Other ideas would be, have you guys ever seen Metacritic.com? Essentially what it does is it collects reviews from different reviewers and kind of does an aggregated score kind of thing. So like, this score will be representative of whatever different, critics like San Francisco Chronicle, Seattle Times, blah blah blah, and they're just using that. So they're doing a little bit more here. They're kind of combining the score and stuff. Not hard, but they're doing that. But this is kind of interesting because I don't think they have any original content at all. I think it's all just, it's just pure critic stuff. And that site is really huge. So there's, stuff like that. There's a lot of sites that curate recipes. You've probably seen lists like, 10 delicious brownie recipes to make this weekend and stuff like that. That's, curated content also. You also see it pop up, and you might not think of it immediately, but so this books like this on the Kindle bookstore, stuff like greatest inspirational quotes, 365 quotes, blah, blah, blah. That's not original content. They're taking quotes that exist in the public domain, because I believe can't copyright quotes. And so they're taking these and just building a book and making it. That's a really easy way to get started with content curation, is to do stuff like this. I mean, you'll find there's tons of them, quotes of wisdom, quotes, blah, blah, blah. You can do a lot of different stuff. It doesn't have to be just quotes. But anything that, say, exists in the public domain or anything like quotes, it's almost just copying and pasting. And I mean, you have to format it and upload it, but that's pretty much all there is to it. So definitely not hard. So you might be thinking, because I'll get asked this, okay, if this content exists somewhere else originally, right? Why does someone read curated content then? Like, why would I go to this other site to read content that, first existed somewhere else? And it's, a fair question. And there are a few reasons. One is convenience. So instead of spending, time going to all these different sites, say, to look for documentary movies, you can go to Documentary Addict and see them all, in lists and in order and stuff like that. So it's a time saver. That's one big reason that people consume curated content. Another one, and this is a big one too, is entertainment. And by entertainment, I don't mean necessarily funny or snarky or whatever. I just mean that the curator has to add something of value. So one example is, being funny or adding funny commentary, but it can also be something like you're telling the person or your audience why you're sharing this piece of content. And that's helpful for them. So you're saying, okay, this is a good article to look at and read, and here's why. And they go, oh, okay, I understand why this is, cool or important to read, and that makes sense to my interests. So they go and read it. So something of value, essentially, is what I mean there. Another reason potentially is that they come to trust the source. So they know that, they go to your site or sign up to your newsletter or watch your videos or read your books or whatever form it takes. They know they're getting information that is good. So, if I'm learning about, investing or something, I know that I can go to, your site and I'll find, a collection of different articles people have written about getting started with investing or what to invest in or what to invest in. And I learned through visiting the site that everything you link to is, really good information that I might not have seen otherwise, because there's so much information online. It gets really hard. I mean, it gets really hard to find it all, right? So that's a big role that content curators play, is just finding the content in the first place. So you might also be thinking, okay, well, it seems too easy, maybe. It sounds easy. I mean, and you're right, you're not, writing your own original content, or, just collecting some links or anything, or, doing stuff like that that is thought of as more labor intensive. You're just kind of collecting some articles or quotes or whatever, and that's kind of it. I mean, it sounds easy enough. And that's partly true. The process itself is relatively straightforward. However, there are some really important concepts that are the absolute difference between success and failure. So, I mean, anyone can curate content, right? It's not hard to go find articles that are interesting or whatever, and send them in a newsletter or put them on your site. Literally anyone can do that, right? You could, after this webinar, you could get that started tonight. But it's what I'm going to talk about after that that's really going to make the difference between, maybe making a little bit of money or being mildly successful versus being really successful. So in other words, like, this is the important thing to learn and understand about curating content. And again, I said this before, I'm going to say it again, but a lot of affiliates, are in the mindset like churn and burn kind of things, or automating or scraping. And if you want to make this work, you pretty much have to get out of that mindset totally. Content curation, it's not scraping a bunch of links or articles. It's not like auto-populating blogs or, doing this or that. So you really have to get out of that mindset and think about, being a really good content curator. So what makes it successful? When you look at an example of curated content, don't just look at what they're doing to be successful, look at why they're successful at it. Okay. So for example, let's take the skim here. Okay. So what are they doing? They're taking news articles and they're writing a snarky line or two and giving a link. Okay. That's what they're doing, right? And that's one reason, that they're successful. But I mean, anyone can do that. So why are they successful? I mean, why are they worth over 50 million and someone else that has a newsletter, email, and news isn't? Well, number of reasons, but so they tapped into a large segment of the population that, kind of sort of wants to know the news, but they just want to keep it light and, not get too serious about it. Maybe just have kind of a laugh or about it. And that's, kind of it. It's aimed really at a specific audience, and the way they present it is exactly how that segment of the audience wants to consume the news. So again, content curation, it has to add something of value. It doesn't mean, you have to completely write some big grand thing about why you're sharing this. It just has to be something, whether it's the way you frame the content or the content that you collect versus another kind of content you collect. So just collecting content itself isn't enough. I mean, think about it. Why would someone visit your site or sign up to your newsletter or whatever? So what is going to make them want to do that versus another site? One of the things, and I talked about this before, is adding, you add entertainment. That could be something like funny commentary or just pointing out the ridiculousness of it. I've seen some successful newsletters where the person doesn't even really write anything about the article they're sharing. They just change the headline, kind of make like a funny or a sarcastic headline and share the article that way. Or it could be just the way that you're framing it, like, okay, here's a piece of news that I'm sharing with you. Here's how it would actually affect you. Okay, this is important to read because it might change, the way taxes run next year or something like that. So people, that's what I mean by entertainment. It doesn't necessarily have to be funny or sad or whatever. It's kind of like the way you present the content. Another way to do this, a way to add value, is adding some kind of insight, which I just talked about. So say I did a weekly marketing newsletter where I chose, I curated the top stories in marketing that week, what was going on with ad networks and advertising and this or that. I could add my thoughts to each story I shared, and I'd be providing insight. Like, why is this important? What can you learn from this? So Facebook ads made this change, blah, blah, blah. Here's how it's going to affect you. Here's what you need to know about it. That's adding some insight, kind of like breaking it down for them. And you're not rewriting the article. I'm just saying a few sentences like, Facebook ads is making this change. Here's what it is. Go read it. That kind of thing. And again, there are endless ways to go with content curation. It's almost unlimited. So the first thing that you have to do, obviously, is decide on your topic. Now, you probably heard this before. It's best to start with something like you're interested in, or something you're interested in reading about or learning about. The thing that trips people up, though, is they say, well, I'm not, there's nothing I'm really super passionate about. I don't have one site or one niche that I'm like really gung ho about, or I really want to, work on or really get into this niche. And I think that's unfortunate that sometimes that things are taught that way, because you don't have to be super passionate about it. I mean, yeah, it does make it easier, but you certainly don't have to be passionate about something to make it successful. I mean, you could be passionate about the money you make from doing it, and that's enough motivation, for you to do it. But having said that, if it's a site or a newsletter or whatever that you're going to be working on for a while, might be different if you plan to outsource it or whatever, but it's going to be content that you're going to have to look at, or read about or find articles. So if you're not passionate about something, just pick something that you don't hate. If you think, okay, 6 months from now, I'm doing these newsletters, am I going to be, hitting my head on the desk? Or is this something that, would at least be somewhat, okay to do for the next 6 months or however long term? So think about that. The topic itself really doesn't have to be your super passionate, life work kind of thing. There are a couple questions and like a formula that I use when I'm brainstorming niches for this, specifically for content curation. You can use pen and paper, or whatever note-taking app you use on the computer, and write notes for each of these questions. And it doesn't have to be all in one sitting. You can kind of think about it and browse and fill it out as you go. So the first thing is, what is interesting or entertaining to read about? This doesn't just mean for you. I said that before, that it's good if you're interested in something, but you don't necessarily have to be super passionate about it. But here, you're thinking of other people. So how do you know? Well, query your social circle, your circle of friends, your family. Just think about things they're interested in, types of books that they read, hobbies that they do, exercise that they do. What do they seem to be interested in? You can get a lot of ideas that way. Also, just browsing around, seeing what kind of sites exist in different niches, what seem to be the big sites, how is the content presented, what makes it interesting to people or entertaining. then where do people normally get that information? You'll find in certain niches, there's usually one um, social site or type of consuming the content that will prevail or will be like the biggest one above all others. So for some niches like Uberfacts, right, that is predominantly Twitter. And then some other ones will be like a website, right? Like, and the Skim is kind of a website slash newsletter, mostly the newsletter. So you can, see, okay, are people consuming this information on your potential niche? Are they consuming it through blogs, through Reddit, YouTube, forums, Twitter, Facebook? And usually you'll find one of those that it might not be the absolute clear winner, but it seems like, okay, yeah, this is where most people go to kind of consume this type of information on this niche. And that's usually a good indication of where to focus your efforts, unless you're seeing a hole in the market where, okay, yeah, a lot of people are here, but it seems like a lot of people would prefer, this other thing. How do they consume that information? So are they reading it? Are they listening to it? Are they watching videos? Is the information short? Is it long? Kind of like the whole process of how they consume it. Is it something they might, flip through their phone on a break from work? Is it something they sit down after work to really get into? That kind of thing. And you're not going to know that unless you know, about the niche a little bit. You're not going to know that until you kind of do some reading about it. And it's not like people are going to say, "Hey, everybody, I really look at this when I go home." But you'll get the general sense of how people, are consuming it. Like, how long are their replies to things? If it's in a format, where they're making replies, like a forum or, blog or whatever. And then what would I add of value to this niche? So would I be writing funny commentary? Would it be finding content that people haven't seen before? Would it be presenting everything in a well-organized manner? So 2 and 3, because we talked about number 1, but number 2, finding content that people haven't seen before, that's a really good way to add value, and probably one of the best things you can do as a content curator, because when there's a big news story or something that everybody's heard about, whether it's in a hobby or whatever, or just something that like everybody knows or reads because it's on the big sites, by the time you share it, they're probably already going to have seen it, right? But there's tons of really great content on the internet that most people don't see, either because it's not in the usual sites that they visit, or, they just never happen to find the site. I mean, just think how big the internet is. So one of your jobs as a curator is to really dig deep and find, the really good content that people aren't finding or, haven't seen themselves. That's usually going to be your best performing content too, is the content that people haven't seen before, that's not super saturated. And it doesn't all have to be, like secret buried information you're unearthing. I mean, that's kind of unreasonable to assume that you're digging up all the time, but that should kind of be the goal that you're working for, is finding content that maybe isn't as saturated as, something that would be really big in the niche. And sometimes adding something of value isn't about being funny or digging content that people haven't seen before. Sometimes it's just about presenting it in a well-organized manner. So sometimes, it might just be like someone is, okay, think about business summary books. That's something where, people don't want to take the time to read the whole book. They want just, to read a short thing and get the basic idea of the whole book. That's kind of the idea there. Or it might be like, hey, I'd really love to read the latest Bitcoin news, but I don't, want to go just to this one site because I want to hear other, ideas or other takes on it. So if you present that in a real well really organized manner or like an easy to consume manner, sometimes that's all you need to be successful with content curation. Then when you get to topic selection, the first thing that I would think about is whether the niche is too broad or well defined. You initially you want to aim to the more well defined area of the market. So instead of doing toys, pick something in that niche, like a sub niche. So board games. Instead of just photography, nature photography. Instead of movies, documentary films, that kind of thing. It's obviously really hard to compete in a huge niche like health. I mean, that's how are you ever going to get noticed, and what are you going to, you know, I mean, even if you really tried to add something of value, it would be just really hard to compete with that. Whereas if you're focusing more on a niche or well-defined segment, it's a lot easier to get noticed. However, instead of trying to find a good niche or a well-defined niche or the perfect niche, it is better just to focus on the way you present the material. So if you were like, yeah, I really want to do toys, and I have this idea that I think is, a way to present the news or some information that people find really useful, that would win over, going, well, it's not well defined enough, so I'm not going to do it. So really the number one thing is thinking about how you're going to present the material. However, I know that, especially if this is your first time doing it, you're not going to know like what the best way to present the material might be. So if that's the case, I would lean more towards the well defined. Like if you really don't know how you're going to fit into the niche, I would say go for the more well defined angle. So in curated content, it's more times than not more about how it's presented than the actual topic itself. Like going back to the skin, that's a perfect example. It's the news that I can get the exact same, news going to CNN or something. Why do I sign up for the skim? Well, it's entertaining the way they present it, or I like getting the newsletter and clicking on the links. It's more like that. It's not just what it is, but how it's presented. Once you pick your topic, then you have to go about finding content. And there's a lot of ways to go about this. Again, the most obvious content is likely to be pretty saturated by the time you see it. So try to choose something that's not at the top of the news, or, not a topic that you see posted on a lot of sites or something, or it could be, a similar topic. Say you're doing toy trains or something, and, everybody in the hobby is talking about this one, toy train, but someone else is talking about it and they have a little bit different of an angle or idea on it. That would be a good example of something to share. So it doesn't have to be completely new and unique, just maybe something that, them, themselves that they, you know what I mean? And like I said before, depending on your topic, it's going to depend on where you find the content. Some of the more popular places that you're going to find content would be blogs, signing up to newsletters, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Pinterest, Reddit. Really, any big site you can find is going to be kind of the main source of your content. And you don't just have to use one. I mean, a good content curator is going to look at multiple sources, because that's going to give them the best chance of finding good content that they want to share. You can and should also curate from curators. So people that are doing exactly what you're doing, which is, they're curating content, follow their sites, and don't just, copy their exactly what they're doing, but think of them as another resource. I mean, they're doing essentially what you're going to be doing, and you are going to find a lot of content in the niche you might not have otherwise found, just like people that are consuming your content. So that's a really good resource to find content. Above all, with content curation, most of your time should be spent discovering new and interesting content. I mean, any of the, manners that I talked about, that's really another big key of being successful at content curation is, finding this content. And it can be really fun, especially if you're really into the niche or even if it's something you want to learn about or whatever. It's really just a lot of searching and reading, and that can be something fun. You can do it, when you sit down to work, you can do it flipping through your phone. You can always be on the lookout for content and bookmarking it when you find it. There are a number of tools that are aimed at curating content. Most of the ones that I've seen that are paid or on some kind of plan like that, I wouldn't recommend. They're a bit overkill for starting out, and most of them are aimed more at bigger companies or enterprises that are doing content creation on a pretty big scale. Something like BuzzFeed, for example. So until you're making significant money, I wouldn't really invest in one. What I would say is start with feedly.com. Let me pull this up here. So what Feedly is do you remember when RSS readers were kind of a thing? You find a blog and you grab its RSS feed and then you go to this one source, your RSS feeder, to read all the news. That's pretty much what this is. What you do or how it works is you create different boards. Like here's some boards that I was creating. And then you add, URLs to it when you find them. So, say there's a blog that posts European television news or whatever. I can add that blog here. And then instead of remembering all these different blogs I have to go to, find content or read about the niche, I just go here to Feedly and it's all here. This is also another way to get your content out faster. Depending on what you're doing with content curation, it's always better to get your content out before someone else's. It's not always practical, but if that's one of your goals with it, this is a good way to do it. And with paid plans or other tools that cost money, you can do stuff like alerts, keywords, all kinds of stuff like that. I think, yeah. So Feedly is free. It's easy to use. You can play around with it. Just put stuff in here. You can create boards. Those are like collections of different topics and stuff. So this is definitely my number one free tool to use when it comes to content curation, just because it's super useful. Another one, not that. Another one that I would look at is Pocket. It's getpocket.com. Depending on what other tools you use, this might not be necessary. Like if you have, a lot of people use OneNote, for example, or I don't know if anybody uses Evernote anymore, but they have a little browser extension Clipper that you can save web pages to your like OneNote or Evernote. This pretty much does the same thing. It's just, it doesn't, so where Feedly, it refreshes and, pulls any new posts that are on the feeds that you saved in there. But with Pocket, it doesn't do that. It just saves, one-off articles. So you find an article, you're like, oh yeah, I want to share that. It's kind of like bookmarking it and just having it all in the central place. So it definitely can be helpful. It's a little bit easier to organize just than doing, Chrome bookmarks, because that gets messy and, you can add notes to it. But if you have another system of saving stuff, that's pretty much all this does. So it might be useful to you, it might not. So then after you have found content that you want to share with your audience, you have to figure out how you're going to distribute it to them. And, we looked at a few different examples. It can be distributed through newsletters, websites, social media. Sometimes it's a combination of all of those. And that's actually what I'd recommend that you do when you start out, because you kind of don't, even if you see like, okay, this niche or this topic, they really seem to hang out on Reddit, for example. But you don't know for sure if your audience is going to do the same thing. I mean, you might do your website and Facebook and Twitter, and you might find, okay, everybody, for my thing that I'm doing here is congregating on Facebook, or where that's where my biggest following is growing. So I kind of recommend not being too narrow when you first start out, just because, you really don't know how it'll play out, and you'll figure it out pretty quickly. And again, there are endless ways to do content curation, but I'm just going to share one that is a fairly straightforward, simple way to get started. So the idea would be to start a blog, like with WordPress preferably, because WordPress, obviously it runs 30-something% of the internet, has all the plugins and everything. So that's kind of the easiest framework to work with. So start a WordPress blog, and then do what I'd call roundup style posts. And you might think, okay, does that mean the news or the top stories of the week? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means you're doing collections of posts. So it's not like, hey, here are 5 great articles I found this week. Normally what people do, and what I do, is pick a theme for each post you do. So let's say I have a site where I curate internet marketing news. I could do weekly posts like, how to get started in online marketing according to the experts. And I might collect, 5 or 10 or however many I want, different posts from different sites where maybe people talked about how they got started with internet marketing. And that's, what I post. The next week, I might do 5 methods for building your first WordPress site. And I might find, 5 different good lessons on, creating a website with WordPress, and I put those into a post. So that's the approach that I would do, unless it's a topic like the news. Obviously, it's maybe a little bit more time sensitive, but otherwise, it's really better to do kind of the theme idea. You want to decide on a publishing schedule and kind of stick to it. Readers come to expect that, and it's much better to set something that you're going to be able to hit and be really consistent. So decide on a publishing schedule that you can do all the time. It's much better to do something, even if it's every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that you can make every time, rather than being really haphazard about it. If you can, I would suggest once a week. I think that's really good. I mean, some people do, there's newsletters that do daily newsletters. It really just depends. I mean, you're probably not going to want to do that when you're starting out and it's, not making any money right away, but it could grow into something like that. And your weekly posts, like I just said, they're just going to be a list of however many articles you curated that week. There's not really a magic number. I would say that, somewhere between 5 to 10 might be good, but it depends on the topic. If it's something really quick, like, I don't know, recipes or something, you could probably do more. But if it's articles or heavy content that people are consuming, you don't want to blast them with, here's 29 different articles you can read. They just want to know okay, what are the best ones to read, or which ones should I read? So in that case, something more 5, 7, whatever, would work. Oddly enough, you'll find that odd numbers or weird numbers, the posts tend to perform a little bit better. I think they just stand out more. So even if you don't put 5 methods of or whatever, you don't have to include that in the title, but just having an odd number, sometimes that's enough to, make it a little like people kind of take notice, I guess. So for each article or post or whatever that you're going to share, you would basically just put the, headline of the article followed by anything from one sentence to a really short paragraph. And this is where you're adding what I called value earlier. So you're adding, insight, or you're telling them why this is a good article to read, something like that. That's where you add that. Just keep it really short. For some, it's just a sentence. Sometimes it might just be a headline. You don't have to do the same thing for everyone you share. Sometimes, the headline might make it super obvious why they should read it. Other times not. Which brings me to, don't use the original article's headline. Write your own. This is super important. So if the original article is like, how I got started with online marketing, your headline could be something like, how someone went from bankrupt to wealthy with online marketing. I mean, that's a lot more interesting, right? So you can usually improve the headline from what someone wrote, but you are also kind of telling people why they want to read it. So if someone's coming to your site, you have this site about internet marketing, and they see how, the story of how someone was successful with it, that, tells them right there, hey, that's really interesting. I want to read that. So you'll get a lot more mileage out of doing your own headlines. You can also, if you're trying to optimize for SEO, you can also make it so certain keywords show up there instead of others, where maybe the author or something didn't use the right keywords, or you see where you can maybe pick up some traffic with, adding certain keywords there. That's another good way to do that. You, of course, always want to link back to the original article. So again, you're not just, giving them a list and everything. You're actually linking to it. You're not sharing the entire article. You're just sharing. Sometimes people don't share, anything from the article. They just have the headline and then their, short one sentence to a short paragraph and then a link to the article. Other people might, have a highlight quote or something from the article, one or two. Something like that's fine, but you really don't want to share like more than that. That's not really cool, basically, to do, because you really want to get people to the article. That's kind of the goal, which sounds weird because you're sending people off the site, but it is what makes content curation successful. Then, of course, after you're posting and stuff, you have to get traffic. There are a number of ways to get traffic. We obviously can't cover everything in this webinar. We just wouldn't even get close. But I will say that unlike most other projects that I can think of, traffic really does come if you focus on curating good content from a number of sources. So I would recommend posting your content. In this example here, if you are doing the blog that I'm recommending, post your content to social media if it's appropriate for social media, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, whatever other social networks you see your niche being talked about in. Then after you've published a post, send an email to the site or person whose article you shared and you talked about, and let them know that you shared their content. But you're not being like, hey, Bob, I shared your content. Will you give me a link on your site? That's super spammy, and people are just going to, mark your email spam and never hear from you again. You really just want to be like, hey, I really liked your article. I shared it. Here's a link. Thanks, blah, blah, blah. And not every single one, but a good number of sites will link back to you if you're doing everything else that I've talked about in this webinar. It's like a win-win situation, right? Obviously, the better you showcase their content, the happier they are, and they're going to be more likely to do a reciprocal link to you. If they see, once your site grows a little bit, they're going to see you sending them some traffic when you link to it, and they say, oh, cool, this site's sending some traffic. I'm going to link back to them so I can keep, so they keep doing that. So it's kind of this reciprocal thing that starts going, and that can be a pretty huge source of traffic for curated content. Also, unlike some other types of marketing that you might do, you don't need a mass amount of traffic to do really well with this. It's really one of those things where having a more engaged audience is a lot more important than the size of the audience. I know people that are doing projects with curated content where, they don't have a very big audience at all, but, they're making tons of money with it, just by, giving the audience exactly what they want. And that audience is, really latches onto the site or however you're distributing the content. And then, hold on. So then, of course, comes monetizing your curated content. This, again, depends on what kind of project you're doing and how you go about monetizing it. Or, how you go about distributing it. But it's really important with curated content not to worry about monetization right away. If you get your site already and then you slap a bunch of ads or affiliate offers on there, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You should really focus on building the audience first and then kind of slowly working the monetization thing into it. You'll have exponentially better results doing that. If you are doing curated content and you have a bunch of ads and links and stuff, it makes your site look spammy, even though it's not. You know what I mean? Because there's not a lot of content on your site right away. So yeah, it's. I would avoid doing that. Here's some ways though that I've successfully and you can successfully monetize curated content. There's more than this. This is just what I have experience with. So paid newsletters. This is where someone literally pays to subscribe to your newsletter. There was a project I did with this before I really knew the term curated content or what it meant. I kind of did something. There's a case study in the forum where I kind of did something with that not by accident, but I wasn't purposely going out and curated content. And usually this is something where they're not paying, $79 a month. It's like a small recurring fee, like $3 to $5 a month or something. And they're, and you send out this curated newsletter. Some people even do where they have like a free version and a paid version. So, the free version might have half the links or half the articles you usually share, and the paid one has all of them. I've seen that work really well. I've had some students that have had really good success with that. Affiliate marketing is, of course, always a way to monetize something like this. I've really never seen a case where I would want to promote CPA offers, though, partly because of the nature of the offers. They usually don't add a lot of value. They can, it depends on what it is, but they usually don't. And they are kind of so up and down all the time that I really don't want to spend my time monitoring, like, okay, is this down? Is the link broken? Blah, blah, blah. There's so much money in other stuff. I just don't even want to bother with that. Selling ads and or sponsorships is another big way to monetize this. If your site gets any kind of traction, if you work on it, you definitely will get approached by people who want to either buy ad space or do some kind of sponsored post or sponsored, email blast or something like that. There are a lot of really big companies that have latched onto this, content marketing idea that's just become so big. So they're really looking for any opportunities they can to, get their business or their brand out there. I've seen some people successfully monetize with Patreon. Just, literally, if you guys don't know what Patreon is, kind of interesting to browse, but just literally saying, hey, donate to keep this site going. And usually the way it works is people donate to you. It's like a monthly recurring thing, anywhere from $1, a month on up. And your subscribers get, something that normal free traffic people don't get. And depending on what it is, you can be really successful. There's people, you can browse Patreon and see some people have their incomes live. Some people don't. There's people making all kinds of crazy amount of money on Patreon. It's really kind of insane to look at. Display ads, so stuff in the AdSense / Mediavine space. Those can be really good depending on what your niche is, what your content is. AdSense, not so much. Something like Mediavine is way more profitable. There are some restrictions to get into it and use it. You have to have so many views and certain types of content, stuff like that. And another way, last thing I'll say is selling your site. I know some people that build these types of sites for the sole purpose of selling them. They're actually planning to sell them when they build up the site. They typically go anywhere from like 6 to 20 times the monthly revenue. So you could build a whole business just by creating and selling these types of sites. If you look on Flippa or other website marketplaces, or read about people buying sites, these sites do sell a lot. You see them all the time, and like I say, they're not particularly hard to build or do, if you are invested in it. And yeah, they can definitely be really profitable selling them. Even if, your site itself isn't successful, like say you do it for 6 months and you go, I really don't want to do this anymore, or I, want to do a different niche, I just want to sell this. I mean, you can always make some money from it because it's going to have domain history. It's going to have, a age domain name. It's going to have some content on the site, stuff like that. That definitely makes it more valuable. Okay, are we rich yet? Almost. So I just want to say one quick thing, and then we'll do some questions. So if you guys do have questions, go ahead and start typing them in, and we can jump right into it. But I'm doing a new course starting next week. I know a lot of you, I think in here, there's a number of people in here that are signed up for it. So it starts next week, and it's called the Consistent Income class. It's pretty much built around content curation. It's a 3-week class, one webinar each week. And each week I'm teaching an individual project. They're like standalone projects. You can do one, you can do all 3, you can combine them together. And it's kind of a complete step-by-step. Here's exactly how you do this, like actually seeing how it's built. I'm going to be building the projects that you're building, so you can see, that's one of the methods I'm going to use to teach how to build these things. So you can kind of see, what it looks like. You can visit the projects, you can, pick them apart, kick them, that kind of thing. But I think that's a really important thing to be able to do, rather than just trying to visualize, okay, how does this look, or exactly what am I supposed to do? And then I'm going to do 6 months of updates through live webinars after the class ends. So every month I'm going to do a webinar, which I can answer questions, but I'm also going to show you, okay, what have I done on my sites? Have I added content? Am I, making money yet? That kind of thing. Am I getting traffic? I'm going to show those through live webinars, followed by a Q&A. I'm also going to do outsourcing instructions. So basically, I want to make it something where you can just take them, hand them to someone that's going to, do your outsource projects, and you don't have to worry about anything else, because there's nothing worse than trying to, teach an outsourced worker to do something and, getting frustrated with that. So I'd like it to be just like done for you instructions. Um, so I'm also going to do a thing where 3 of the students that take the class, I'm going to give them my 3 finished projects. So the ones that I'm doing for the class, I'm going to give those away to 3 students who take the class. Even if they're generating income or whatever, I'm going to be giving them away to people, kind of as an incentive. There is going to be some really basic requirement to meet to, be able to be eligible for those. Like if you sign up and, you never attend a webinar, you never ask a question or something, you're probably going to have fewer points or fewer chances. I don't know how I'll do it yet, versus someone who, participates in the webinars and or shows some sites they're working on, stuff like that. I know not everyone can, you know, go to all the webinars because of time differences and everything. So it's really not just that. I mean, I just want to know, I am going to weight it so people that are showing kind of like, hey, I'm kind of invested in this, it's going to be weighted a little bit towards them, but everyone will have, a chance to get those. I need to close registration tomorrow because it starts next week, next Wednesday, and I was going to close it earlier, but then I figured I would do it after this webinar. So I have to finalize things, so I'm not going to sell anything after tomorrow. But here, I will. Give me 1 second here. Sorry, I had this on my. Okay, so in your, let's see, in the chat area, I'm going to send 2 links. And maybe I am. I'm going to send 2 links. One's going to be the sign up form. The other is going to be the sales page, so you can read about it more in depth and see like exactly what you get and exactly what I'm going to be teaching. So bear with me 1 minute here. Sorry about this. And do keep asking your questions. I see those coming in. So thank you for that. Okay, here we go. So the first link, that's the sign up form. The second link, that's the class sales page form. You can read about it. Feel free to ask questions either on the webinar or just send me an email afterwards to david@askplaybook.com. If you're interested or you have more questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you. Okay, let's get into the questions here. If I happen to miss your question, feel free to ask it again, because sometimes if it's scrolling too fast, I end up missing one. Let's see, will you give an example of a curation site you created yourself and talk about your personal experience doing it? That's what I'll be doing in the class. I don't have one for the webinar, like public, that I'm going to share. No, not for that. There's a case study in the forum you can read about. It doesn't show the site, but it talks about how I set it up. It was the newsletter thing. What WordPress plug would you recommend for content curation? Do you mean plugin or like theme? You don't need any plugin to do it. It's literally just writing a post. You could do it with a, default WordPress install and default theme. I would say just it doesn't really matter what theme you use, just keep it clean. I use something like Generate Press or Ocean WP, Astra. Those are probably the three that I use the most. Just something that's really clean and easy to use. Do you have any other insight regarding SEO for these sites? How do you avoid being flagged for thin content, duplicate content? Yeah, that's a good question. Let me give me 1 second. I'm gonna send this after the webinar. Well, I'm not gonna be able to. Sorry, I have all these windows open, so I'm not going to be able to find it right now, but I'll send this after the webinar. I do have, there we go. I do have a PDF. It's not one I wrote, but I was going to send it to you guys, and it shows some like studies, experiments that have been done on curated content. Duplicate content, it's not really an issue anymore. It never was really a huge issue. It was if you were like scraping sites and just doing the same thing, but you're not, essentially your page is going to be all new content. I mean, it's, even though you're sharing the stuff, there isn't another page that lists those four things and says the exact same thing that you say. So there's no duplicate content, anything like that. And for keywords, yeah, so that's kind of I'm trying to think how I can answer it in a relatively quick manner. Essentially, I would just look for keywords that, get some traffic. It doesn't really matter so much the number, even if they're, only getting, but you want it to have some traffic. The thing with keywords, though, is, yeah, you're always trying to rank for a certain phrase or word or something, but really where you end up getting the traffic is you end up ranking for all these other phrases that, you never really targeted, but, that somehow, Google decides your site, because of maybe a word in the headline and a word in your article or whatever, decides that, okay, this is what's important. This is what this article is about. So you kind of see that happen, but I would just look for keywords that have some traffic, but not like the top things, not like weight loss or something. Look at stuff related to that is getting some traffic. I would go to answerthepublic.com. It's kind of a cool / weird search question generator thing that you can look and you can kind of see like what people are searching for with different content, and you'll get all kinds of different questions they're asking. That can be a really good way to discover keywords, and it can be a really good way to phrase your like headlines and like what you're saying in the body of the article. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's see. Hey, Ashish, I'm not sure. Let me look after the webinar and I can send you an email and let you know. I don't remember if that does. I'll look, yeah. Cool. Yeah, you can email me that too, John. Yeah. Oh, thin content. Yeah, sorry. No, not really. I mean, your site isn't going to have a ton of content on like your first or second post, but it's not really about that. SEO, it's probably not going to be your number one or even two or three traffic source. It's going to be kind of like an auxiliary or a bonus thing that you get without even really trying. The real traffic is going to come more from something with some kind of social component and sharing component, some kind of social media, or something that gets talked about on Reddit or something like that. That's where you're going to get the most growth from. You're not really necessarily going for SEO traffic. You will get some though, especially when if you get some reciprocal links kind of going. But yeah, you definitely don't have to worry about the thin content kind of thing. I mean, like look at BuzzFeed; they have tons of articles, right? But even that one I shared with you, I mean, there was like one sentence per post that they shared. So it's not really an issue. You're not like a original content site that people are going for like long articles. And Google knows that, they see that you're sending people to sites that they've probably deemed as like trustworthy or authoritative. Cool. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, sure. Thanks. Um, okay. All right. Any other questions you guys have? Give you guys a second to type that in. Yeah, social is really important, I would say. Yeah, I would say that's a big component of it for sure. And sometimes it's kind of a thing where people just start sharing it from different places and you get traction that way. Sometimes it's, a little bit from SEO, a little bit from Facebook, and it really kind of depends on the niche and how most people are finding your site or your newsletter or whatever. Okay, cool. If you guys do think of any questions, let's see. Do you have a goal for how quick you want to see traffic? Yeah, sooner the better, obviously. I mean, not really. I really, like I said, just worry about doing a good job of curating content because I know if I do that, that the traffic will start. And again, it's definitely not all about traffic. That's why it's so important to focus on the content because you can do really, really well with a relatively small audience. You don't need, tens of thousands of visitors or anything. A small dedicated, audience will do really well. But I mean, so traffic itself is no indication of like when you're going to make money. So if you see traffic sooner, it doesn't mean you're going to make money sooner or anything. You can potentially get traffic really fast. Something like Pinterest. If your niche fits there, you can get a lot of traffic from that. Relatively quick, relatively speaking. So yeah, just kind of depends. But that's kind of like something I worry about after focusing on the content. All right. Well, if you guys do think of anything else that you want to ask, be sure to send me an email, david@playbook.com. If you're interested in the class, please check it out. I'll send a follow-up email with a link to the webinar and a couple other things that I was going to send you guys. But yeah, if you think of anything else, let me know. And thank you for joining me tonight. I hope you got a lot out of it. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks.